So let's get this going. Thank you, everybody, for coming. This is another Fire Safe Sonoma Fire Alliance meeting. My name is Roberta McIntyre. I'm the President and CEO of Fire Safe Sonoma. We're sponsoring this series of meetings. We hope for it to be a monthly thing. Last couple months we didn't have one because I didn't have an AmeriCorps fellow to help with it, and my bandwidth got a little too thin. So this is a comeback from our little bit of a sabbatical or dormant period, if you will. So welcome everybody. Just a reminder for those just now showing up, we are recording. You probably get the little announcement when you pop in that it is being recorded. And the idea will be to, historically we have not made these recordings available. We typically would use them for taking minutes or, memorializing things we said. However, in this particular case, because of the content, we will make this recording available to folks, because I think that with what's going on in Sonoma County lately, with the county tax measure likely to come around, I wanted to have this information available to folks that couldn't quite attend today, and who may not even have known about it in advance enough to get into this meeting. Let's see. So for those of you that are new to our Fire Alliance meetings, the goal is to create a space for conversation and partnership on wildfire prevention and emergency preparedness across the county. And I'm actually moving away from the word or the term wildfire prevention and starting to call it wildfire risk reduction. I think that's actually overall a better term, and it paints a more accurate picture of what we're all trying to do, I think. In the interest of time for this particular meeting, I'm not gonna do like what Kaylin would do with overall group introductions. And so what I'm gonna ask y'all to do is to put in the chat, let's see, yeah, your name and organization. And then I also just put that as a reminder in the chat. And then I also dropped in there some Fire Safe Sonoma links to kind of get people involved and engaged who aren't quite yet engaged and involved with Fire Safe Sonoma. Let's see, did that. Yeah, just a reminder, you should be muted when you jump into the room, but please keep yourself muted if you're not speaking. And I do have some background noise. I've got the scanner on. If that starts to become annoying, I'll run in and turn that down. Please use the hand raising feature to ask questions, and Mason, our Grizzly Spark fellow, will help me out with monitoring that. And so with all that housekeeping stuff out of the way, welcome everybody. A lot of good folks here, and this is going to be really timely information, particularly right on the heels of this morning's meeting with the Sonoma County Fire Services working group. So with that said, I'm excited today to be joined by Mark Brown from the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority and Rich Shortall from Fire Safe Marin. They'll be giving us a presentation on their experience with their Measure C in Marin County that was passed about a year ago, I'm guessing. And also with that in mind, and with the topic of the Sonoma tax measure that's moving forward, I will send everybody who's registered a follow-up survey with, I think, 4 or 5 questions related to the Sonoma County tax measure, just to get a sense for where you all are at with that. And I'll do it after this. And if you could do it pretty quickly after this meeting, the survey, then your thoughts will be fresh with regard to the survey questions. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Mark Brown to tell us a little bit about his point of view from the experience of Measure C in Marin County. And then after that, we'll go into a presentation by Rich Shortall. So I'm going to be quiet now and pass it off to you, Mark.
Thanks, Roberta. And I'm just going to talk about some of my efforts to share the MWPA story in Sonoma County, and Rich will be covering how we got to Measure C and all that work that went on. Just for the group's knowledge, I may work for the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority and retired from the Marin County Fire Department, but I'm a lifelong Sonoma County resident. In fact, a 7th generation Sonoma County resident, and I started my fire career as a volunteer firefighter in Kenwood. So I have pretty deep roots in Sonoma County. And as I grew up as a young firefighter in Kenwood, starting in 1986, the Nuns Fire from 1964 was lore. I was raised on what the Nuns Fire did, what the Nuns Fire meant to the Kenwood Fire Department, Glen Ellen Fire, all of the Sonoma Valley. And some of the people that were on at Kenwood Fire had been on when I was there was on the original Nuns Fire. So to see that history repeat itself was remarkable from my part. And then as a Sonoma County resident, I really want to see coordinated efforts to increase and I like the way Roberta phrases, it's not really wildfire prevention, right? We're reducing the risk because we're not really going to prevent the fires. And I've been offering the MWPA story to many groups throughout the county, and not saying that this is the template that everybody should follow. I'm offering to people that this is a template that worked for Marin County, and there could be components within that template that work for Sonoma, and there might be templates that aren't that in there that may not be the best template for you. Some of the groups that I've met with, I've had the opportunity to meet with Supervisor Corsi, Supervisor Gorin. I have met with the Sonoma County Fire Chiefs Association, Sonoma County Alliance, the Fire District Board, the Sonoma County City Managers Group. And we're also hoping to get on the calendar for the Sonoma County Mayors and Council Members Council. So just trying to share that story. And the number one message that I've been trying to share is the governance model that we were able to create. And the CLE report that was commissioned by the Board of Supervisors hit on the governance piece. And from someone from a Sonoma County resident, but not being internal to any of the Sonoma County agencies, and maybe my perspective is wrong, but I'm not seeing a holistic governance model to help coordinate all of the efforts, especially in regard to some of the funding that's been coming in through grant fundings. And one of the things that I see missing a lot is tapping into the tremendous subject matter expertise that Sonoma County has within the fire agencies. The process I've seen has seemed to exclude the Sonoma County fire agencies and creating that holistic process. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's just the view that I have. So that's what I like about the governance model that we've created for the MWPA, is that it is inclusive of all of our fire agencies, as well as our each town, each jurisdiction that has taxing and fire authority. We have city managers working side by side with fire chiefs through our process. So I think that we've created an effective governance model. And we are actually driven from the ground up. Our operations committee is staffed by fire chiefs and city managers. They create our strategy for that year. And then our advisory technical committee is staffed by each of our member agencies. And those are our pre-fire engineers, our fire prevention folks that are working on this project every single day. They create the projects that are in alignment with that countywide strategy. And then we wrap it up into an entire bundle and push it up through the process. And then our advantage is that we do have funding to support that. But the message I've been trying to share with the Sonoma County folks is that in my eyes, create a governance model that works, that makes sense to you. And then I think you exercise that governance model to use the funding that you currently have. And then if need be, you go after sustainable funding after that. And that's my 2 bits, and I'll pass it off to Rich for the presentation.
All right, thanks, Mark. And Mark, jump in at any time during the presentation if there's something you want to add to this. I'm going to do the ever popular share screen, so bear with me for a second here, please. All right, I trust everybody can see this okay. So we're really, it's a little bit intermixed, but Measure C was a tax measure that was put on the ballot. We'll talk more about it, but that is what enabled us to create the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority down here. So, oops. So what got this started really was the experience of Sonoma with the North Bay. Well, actually, I should go back a little further than that. In 2016, we updated our community wildfire protection plan. It is really a very comprehensive one. We're very proud of it. It's a countywide effort, and it really created the framework for collaboration because we looked at the county as a whole, everybody understanding that basically fire knows no boundaries. So you need to cooperate, and I don't know, a fuel break created on a ridge somewhere, maybe 80% in one jurisdiction and 20% of the other, but both are getting 100% of the value of that fuel break that's in there. Then the next one, and I was part of this, and I really found it very informative, was after the North Bay fire sieges up there. The fire chiefs, law enforcement, other representatives of Sonoma County came down to Marin and met with groups down here for a very candid discussion of what had happened up there, what the experience was during those fires, what areas that Sonoma thought they could make improvement in, and lots of questioning back and forth. It was really helpful. And then we took that experience and took a hard look at where we were and what we needed to do. And again, we feel very strongly that really our counties are really pretty similar in terms of topography and vegetation and whatnot. So we've just been lucky to not have an ignition down here. We're so close that I meet monthly with Roberta because we really have a lot in common. Around the same time this is going on, our Marin Civil Grand Jury decided that wildfire was a topic that they want to take up. To their credit, they interviewed a lot of people. They looked at some of this work that had been done, and their recommendation was the creation of some kind of a joint powers authority that would coordinate all these efforts down here. And that would really help identify the gaps. And once again, as I point out, if we're not all pulling this together, it doesn't really do a lot of good if one jurisdiction does a lot of work in the area and the neighbors really don't. It's got to be across the county. So much like you, a lot of our county is at risk. This is from our CWPP, and you can see extreme fire conditions are out here. Much like you, we have a lot of publicly owned land and open spaces and whatnot. We may, as a percentage, we may even have more. A lot of the western part is, but you can see even along the central corridor of Marin, where there's a lot of residents and whatnot, there is a lot of fuel there and a lot of risk if we were to have a big wildfire. So what was the solution? We did agree with the grand jury recommendation that local fire agencies, cities and towns, the county as a whole should really work together and form a joint powers authority so that we can have a comprehensive approach to wildfire prevention and emergency preparedness. Before we get into the details, that is a little bit easier said than done. We have 19 taxing authorities in Marin County, and all of them needed to come together in order for us to put this on the ballot. And there was a lot of discussion. It's not surprising. You have large jurisdictions like Novato, that's 25% of Marin, or San Rafael, that's about 25% of the population and of the tax revenue that's generated in the county. And then you'll have a smaller jurisdiction like San Anselmo or little communities in West Marin, and then there's a lot of unincorporated area. And it's not surprising that everybody wants to be sure they're going to get their share of the pie. And there was a lot of discussion about that, but people were very open-minded about it. And I think, I'm not going to get into it a lot now, but Mark alluded to it. The governance within this JPA really takes all of that into consideration, and how voting is done, how the different agencies participate, in ways to ensure that people really do get their share, but at the same time, we're doing collaborative planning that works for all of us. So that was kind of put together as a proposal to go before the voters. And this is a little bit of an older slide, so I'm not sure if I have the exact numbers correct. Mark can update me, but this is approximately ours. Rather, and there was a lot of discussion about whether to do this with a sales tax or a flat out parcel tax or whatever. And we were very fortunate to have the involvement right from the very beginning with what I would concern sort of the concerned taxpayer groups in Marin. They're not usually excited about supporting a tax, but they really did recognize the need and the risk of wildfire in the county. So they had a lot of input in this, which I think was pretty good. So we decided that the fairest thing to do before the voters was really a tax that was based on parcels, but the size of the building within the parcel affected the amount people would pay. So if you're in a smaller building in a parcel, you pay less, and a larger one, you pay more. People thought that that was fairer than a flat out per parcel tax or any kind of a sales tax, because there's several of the jurisdictions had sales tax that were already bumping up against the allowed limits for a sales tax. So pushing it more for some jurisdictions, that would have been tough to do. And then there's unimproved parcels and so forth. There's consideration for that, or multiple resident units on a parcel, apartment buildings. And then just like, and I'm sure exactly like Sonoma and other areas, you know, we have a lot of people who have very valuable properties, but don't have a lot of income. And so there is an exemption built in this for seniors with low income. And then there's an inflation adjustment with a cap on that of 3% maximum. And that doesn't necessarily mean that's what it's going to be every year. That's just the maximum it could be. And all of this got the support of taxpayer groups. And honestly, without that, I'm not sure that this would have passed, because during this election, literally, I think every tax measure, well, certainly in Marin, did not pass. And for the most part, throughout the entire state of California, it wasn't a time when people were in the mood for raising their taxes. So we ended up with, and here's the yard sign for yes on Measure C. One of the things that really helped in this is we have a very strong Firewise community program down here in Marin. We have about 75 of them. Collectively, they put out about 1,500 of these signs. I mean, you could not drive anywhere in Marin that you did not see yard signs with yes on C. We don't have billboards down here, but every available space that would let us put up a big sign, it was put up there. And I think I literally saw one no on C sign during the entire campaign. So a lot of support and a lot of hard work by people who are really concerned about the program. One last part of this, and again, this is just everybody's sense of the right thing to do, and also from the taxpayer groups, was that there's a citizen oversight committee for this. Then their sole job is really to make sure that all the funds are spent so that they line up with what the program was formed to do. So in this program, you're not allowed to what we would call supplant. So if you're already doing something, you don't get to say, good, now I can divert funding to go do something else and just take funding from this source to go do that. It's got to be new programs or enhanced programming. And of course, it all has to line up with the mission. And the mission is, broadly speaking, fire prevention or wildfire prevention or whatever we're calling it now. So you can't, it's not suppression. You can't hire more firefighters and so forth. And of course, there needs to be a work plan and budget and all the typical accountabilities out there. So we're very fortunate. Went on March 2020 and it passed with 70.8% support. We were pretty happy with that, again, in a time when most things weren't doing very well. So what are the goals of the organization? There's 5 big ones. One, wildfire detection evacuation, and you have your own experience with this. We all know about it. We need everybody signed up and knowledgeable about the alert and warning systems, whether it be in our case, Alert Marin, know how NIXA works down here, know what horns and sirens and all the rest of that means, what's the difference between an evacuation order, an evacuation warning, and so forth. We all find that if we have a large fire, there's got to be a ton of coordination for evacuation, and that's the law enforcement and firefighter, the fire suppression, everybody all working together to make sure it works. And then much like you, Marin was not created with large scale evacuation in mind. So we have a lot of small streets. We have several major corridors that literally everything funnels into that are busy on a simple day, let alone an evacuation day. So we really wanted to look at ways to improve that going forward. The next one is Firehouse Reduction, pretty straightforward, reduce combustible plants and vegetations, protect communities, critical infrastructure, but that just doesn't mean throw the money out there. It's got to be strategic. And I always like to use the example, which I think we kind of see on the next slide. I live in this area called Sleepy Hollow here. It's right near San Anselmo and Fairfax and Ross. So to the north of us, we have Terra Linda. It's one community. Over here, this is, actually, I should have said it's Terra Linda over in this area. This is Lucas Valley up here, different jurisdictions. We have Fairfax over here. We have unincorporated Marin over here. We have San Anselmo here, and Sleepy Hollow is also unincorporated Marin, surrounded by all these ridge lines that are very vulnerable. And so once again, if you do work up on here, this is probably 75% in Terra Linda, but Sleepy Hollow and Terra Linda are getting the benefit of that work, and you can see how that works throughout this. And this is all strategic planning. So when we look at coming up with vegetation management projects, the large scale ones, they need to be strategic so that we're getting the most valuable for everybody. And then how we go about it depends. Some of it's grazing, some of it's hand crews, some of it's masticators, combination of all the above and whatnot. It really depends on the terrain. Oops, I skipped one here. Of course, public education is very important, and that's sort of where Fire Safe Marin comes into play. Certainly, we're not the only ones pushing out public information, all the fire agencies and whatnot do, but we need all that to be coordinated. Fire Safe Marin is the general voice for this, but we're all in this together, and we make sure that the terminology and what we're stressing and whatnot is pretty much shared by everybody. And I could get into it, but we have really moved public education forward here in Marin County solely because of the support coming from the MWPA, because there just wasn't a lot of money put into this in the past. We have a lot of really exciting programs that are its own presentation in the future. Next is, I don't know why I'm sorry, I'm kind of bounced. Okay, festival space and home hardening evaluations. My own personal bias is that 10 years from now, when the tax measure sunsets and we have to go back for renewal or review everything that we've done, I really believe this will be the most important program that we've done of all. So this is really a coordinated program where homes are evaluated in a very thorough fashion. They're looking at home hardening, they're looking at the backyards, they're looking at reducing hazards. And time is spent with the homeowners out there, and they're left with sort of a real plan and a documentation of what they're doing well and what needs to be improved upon. And
Rich, can I interrupt real quick?
Please go ahead.
I just want to support what you just said. 100% agree that at the end of 10 years, the cornerstone of our program will be the D-Space program. And 20% of our budget right now goes towards home hardening and home D-Space evaluations. Several of the jurisdictions have put their local dollars towards it as well, and some of our core, what we call our core dollars towards. So we've actually increased that 20%. And I can see the possibility of our board of directors wanting to increase that 20% allocation and decreasing perhaps our core budget so that we can put even more emphasis on this program.
So just to give you a sense of the scale, this year we've already done 25,000 inspections. So we're getting out there, we're reaching people, and to support that program, much as Mark is bringing out, MWPA is creating grants for seniors, low income, people with access and functional needs. Other individual communities are taking some of their MWPA funding and doing the same thing with that funding, which is great. And because we recognize that some people really can't afford to do the work. In these early rounds, the first couple of years, the focus is very much on education. So informing people about what they need to do. We're not issuing a bunch of citations right now, but there will become a time where some properties will need to become abated, and we'll be dealing with that in the future, what that takes to make that happen. The next one is really looking at this. Every jurisdiction is a little bit different. And so you have the terrain in Novato is different than the terrain is in Bolinas, for example. So there is some money set aside. You'll see how we set aside our pots of money a little bit to allow local communities to do some projects that are unique for themselves. And some of them actually use a lot of that money to create grants for people within there. Other ones have a local vegetation management project or something else that they feel that they need to do that's unique to them. So there is still room for some local determination of what an individual community needs. And then grants, as I pointed out, we're just getting started in the grant universe. MWPA is going to come up with a robust program. I was on a presentation yesterday where one of the chiefs from CAL FIRE gave a really impressive presentation of, I think, quite a bit that's rolling out from the state in the future to help with home hardening, defensible space. I think there's a real understanding that people do need some financial support to get this work done. So that's a big part of the program. So how big is all this? The budget, it raises about $20 million a year. That's great because it's kind of a steady, it's an amount that you can count on year to year. And it is strictly for prevention and mitigation, not operations. I mentioned there's no supplanting around, and you have to supplement what you're already doing. And I think that it is really making a huge difference here in Marin. The way it's, oops, I'm sorry, back up again. This is the way it's allocated. So 60% of it is for programs that have an impact on all of Marin. So for example, public education is really pretty much universal for everybody in the county. There are certain fuel management projects that are the larger type of ones I described that benefit large areas of the county. The defensible space program, 20% of the funding goes to that, and then 20% is left to the individual jurisdictions allocated on a pro rata basis, which is determined by how much of the contribution towards the funding of MWPA comes to them. So obviously more for a larger jurisdiction than a small jurisdiction. And then again, they can make the type of local projects that we were describing there. In the most simplistic way, the organization is run by a board of directors at the top. These are elected officials from the 17 participating taxing authorities in Marin. There are 2 taxing authorities that chose not to participate, Tiburon and Belvedere, but everybody else is in the program. So each of the agencies has 1 representative. It's kind of a complicated voting structure, but I think everybody's found it to be very fair. There's a citizens oversight committee that is, as I described earlier, is there to make sure everything is spent as the taxpayers meant it to be. Then there's an operations committee with a representative from each of the 17 agencies. It's mostly from the fire agencies, but not exclusively, to make determinations and recommendations to the board. And the operations committee in turn is supported by a technical advisory committee with pretty broad representation, including large land management agencies and whatnot, to sort of take the first pass at developing the types of programs and proposals that go to the larger group. So how did all this go? Well, in the first year, it had its challenges because this was on the ballot in March, and then it had to get up and running as best as it could by July 1st. So that's a very short period of time. You had to create the governing board, some of the committees, the JPA agreement, new bylaws, selecting an executive officer, which was Mark, where poor Mark was there all by himself for quite a while, trying to pull all this together. Had to get legal representation, which sounds simpler, but there was like a 4-hour meeting to determine who the legal representation would be. So, 17 people on here, they have different points of view. I mentioned CEQA only because one group that I didn't talk about who supported this is, much like Sonoma, we have a very strong environmental community here in Marin, and they came out pretty strongly in support of the program. But they wanted to make sure that if we're doing work, whether it be in somebody's backyard or in the larger open spaces, that it's done in an environmentally sensitive manner, which everybody is on board for that. So making sure that we're compliant with CEQA and so forth for every project before it's undertaken was a big part that went into this. So we have advisory groups and legal teams and whatnot. They're on board to make sure everything is reviewed and done properly. And then everything has to be transparent. And the transparency, I personally think, has been spectacular. I mean, there's no secret meetings, there's no secret decisions. Everything's out in the public, even the meetings of all the subcommittees. So we had to get a whole bunch of projects in, adopt a budget in a very short timeline, and then major projects were launched: home evaluations, publication, fuel reduction, local mitigation. All that started just a few months after the tax measure passed. So now we're into the second year of this, where we had a little better change, a little more time to develop projects and so forth. All the committees are up and running. There were 111 projects submitted for funding. And of course, all the environmental guidelines are in place, and everybody's very comfortable with that. And I think that's moving forward really well. And so with that, I'm kind of opening it up to questions or comments from Mark, or however Roberta would like to manage it.
Mark, since Mark's still here, Mark, do you have anything else to add, or to elaborate on? And then I don't see any hands raised yet, but I have made a list of a handful of questions I want to toss out to you guys.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll add, because Rich was instrumental all through this process. And I think the pre-existing relationships that we had in Marin helped us a lot. Most of our jurisdictions are not big enough to do things on their own. So they have gotten, and not just in the fire service, in city government, county government, town government. So they've gotten good at working with each other. So I think that was a big bonus for us, and one of the reasons that we were successful. And then city managers and fire chiefs standing side by side, talking to the elected officials together was huge. And then there absolutely positively has to be a champion, someone that's carrying this, someone that's made that their mission. And we had that in the form of Jason Weber. And he made this his baby along with others. It wasn't just Jason, but Jason really made it his passion and brought other people along. And I think that's really what, for any endeavor that people go into, that's what you need.
Yeah. And then it sounds like, you guys were really getting a lot of help from the local communities and community groups, which is good. And I think it was brilliant reaching out to the anti-tax PACs and those groups, pulling them in right away, just making it clear to them the intent, et cetera. I think that's brilliant. That might be something that Sonoma County, we should think about moving forward. So I do have a question. To just back up a little bit, this morning I actually was honored to attend a meeting with our Sonoma County Fire Services Working Group. They had their initial stakeholder meeting where they invited a bunch of us to start brainstorming on how to move forward with the Sonoma County tax measure, which was great. And one of the things that came up was the timeline. I'm kind of curious with you guys. Well, two questions. Can you tell me a little bit more about why you chose the property tax measure over the sales tax measure? And then how much of a window were you guys working within from concept to completion to get this thing on the vote?
So the main thing that drove the decision of property tax versus sales tax is that several of the jurisdictions were very up close to the limit of how much it could be raised. And the little bit of room they had to left to maneuver in, like a quarter or a half cent, they wanted to save that in case they had to do something locally. But the more discussion there was about it, and the taxpayer groups actually really also liked the way it was done. So it ended up becoming a better solution, even if we could have gone the other way. So it was pretty well supported. There was a sense that there wasn't enough time to do this. We started, I don't know. I can't tell you exactly, but I'm going to say really like September, October, November for a measure that had to go on in March. And we did hire a consulting company to help with us to do things like surveys of voters to make sure there was support and so forth. I can't echo strongly enough what Mark said about Jason Weber. He really did carry this. I mean, he worked, 20 hours a day on this thing everywhere to get everybody together. And if you know him, he's really good with people and he really knows how to bring people together. And so the work that he did, particularly, and not picking on the group, but with their group, town managers all have to kind of look out for their own interests a little bit. And he just really did a good job of bringing them in with the fire departments and that mission, like Mark said. And that's what made it go quickly. And then the Firewise groups jumped into it for community support. And that, that represents, 25,000 people or so easily in our county. And they pushed this and supported it really hard.
So the Mr. Weber that you mentioned, who, I don't know who that is. Who is he within your community? Is he a legislator? Is he just?
He's our county fire chief.
Pardon?
He's our county fire chief.
Oh yes. Oh okay.
We think everybody knows him because he's kind of everywhere, and he's he's a very magnetic personality.
Well, I'm feeling a little ignorant right now. Okay. Can you give me an idea of roughly the campaign cost? What did it cost to pull this off?
Not a lot. I have to go. I mean, the real cost was hiring the consultant. Pretty much everything was done, with, I'm not gonna say volunteers, but people pitching in. I'd have to go back and look at the cost of that. But I felt it was actually relatively inexpensive. I can get that number for you. There wasn't a lot to do, even yard signs and things like that. They're inexpensive, and they were sort of built into what we could say. We did have one person who donated a substantial amount of money to the campaign, $100,000.
Oh, wow.
Which carried for a lot of the expense of yard signs and all the rest of that. And of course, you can't really use government money to manage the campaign and all, but that person, their contribution really helped a lot. But it's a big county. That's, it's still small money for what was accomplished.
Yeah. And then with that said too, I think you had a lot of sweat equity, if you will, with regard to the local community groups. In fact, Priscilla, she's with one of our COPE groups up in, northern Sonoma County. She's one of our local champions, and she was asking the same question: how engaged and involved were the local groups? Like that, from what we talked about earlier, that was key in making this happen, as I understand it.
Well, I think there's almost like several things that all lined up. We had a good champion for it. Having the concerned tax citizens support it was a big deal. Having the environmental community support it was a big deal. Easier said than done. And then the Firewise people were just fantastic. So it kind of all lined up really well. If any one of those groups had not been behind it, I'm not sure it would have passed.
Yeah.
We need 2/3, so it's not simple. Nothing else was close, I can tell you.
Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit about how the grants program part works? What percentage of that 20 million is set aside for the grants, and how is that dealt with? Is there a board of members, specific people that sit on a grant committee to determine that, okay, this is a good project over here, we'll fund this? How does that all work? If you could dive into that a little bit.
Want me to take that one, Rich?
Please.
So grants are more right now, they're more for individual property owners or HOAs. It's not necessarily grants going out to Firewise communities or grants that are going out to fire departments, because our core budget is built for fire departments to build projects in conjunction with their communities. I saw the question about the involvement with the community. It sounded like that question is a little bit post MWPA formation. So our fire departments work with their Firewise communities and with their residents to figure out what projects they need to fund with their allocated dollars. So the grant program is more for people to do the work on their private residential properties. And we have several different grant programs being built. The one that's being entered or developed, and we look to launch it in November, is for those that are low income or those with access and functional needs for their defensible space work. And it's tied directly to their defensible space evaluation. There's discoveries in that evaluation. And so they could say, and the grant application that we're working on connects with the defensible space evaluation. So when they start their grant process, put their address in, then we already know what discoveries were found on that property, and they're told what discoveries are eligible for that grant. And then they go through the process. And then we're also doing a home hardening matching grant. So right now we have $500,000 set aside for those two programs, $250 each. Then several of our local agencies have used their local mitigation dollars to have different variations of grant programs. Novato has a higher home hardening matching grant program than we do. People can use them in conjunction. They've got a great program to reach out to HOAs, so condo complexes can get access to them. We look to model that for a JPA-wide grant. And then Central Marin Fire has been doing something interesting. They've been using their grant monies more like, they're calling it voluntary abatement. And they're finding some of the most dangerous properties. And instead of doing a forced abatement and coming in and doing the work and then levying their property taxes, they're actually coming in and saying, hey, if you are volunteer to be abated, we're going to come in and do the work on that property. And again, they're targeting those residences that are the most likely to ignite and then spread to the rest of the community.
Okay. Another good question that was brought up was, and this actually really came to the surface this morning at the other meeting I alluded to. How did you guys get the environmental folks on board? I know in your presentation, Rich, you mentioned CEQA, but I feel like the way you mentioned that is probably broader than just CEQA, just bringing those environmental partners, and stakeholders into the mix. What did that look like? How colorful was that?
So I think there's two parts to it. Maybe I'll take the first part and then turn the second part to Mark. Okay. So the first part is before the measure was passed, there were a group of people in the environmental community who formed a group called Environmentally Sensible Practices, ESP. I always kid them. They literally did not know what ESP meant. I go, do you realize that's the acronym? Anyway, they're wonderful people. They're very nice. But they pulled together a lot of the major sort of, I would say, environmental leaders and players in the county. And they had a series of meetings, and some of them were just talking environmental best practices and what do we value, what's important, and there were value studies done and whatnot. But it started to bring that group together. Not everybody, as you know, in the environmental community looks at things the same way. But there was also a lens of fire safety put on it fairly early on, so that we're not just talking carbon capture, we're thinking about this in terms of wildfire. And people do recognize that that's an issue out there. So there are discussions about that. And there was, in that sense, that group supported the tax measure. But to be honest, still not everybody in that group sees things the same way. There are some environmentalists that are a little more skeptical of work that's being done. And there's sort of some subgroups as part of that have really been paying attention to this and expressed their concerns and whatnot. And the way we've been dealing with that, and Mark can get into this, is from the very beginning, recognizing that there's been an outreach to involve those groups. And then I think Mark can talk about the measures that have been put in place to ensure that we're doing things the right way.
Okay.
One of the one of the first things we started after the MWPA became official was to meet on a regular basis with the MWPA, with all the environmental stakeholders and fire representation, and develop best management practices and make it clear that we are following CEQA, and we will follow best management practices that are in alignment with CEQA. And if we will go beyond CEQA, if it also benefits wildfire prevention. And the reason why I say that is that basically one of the things I've had to say a lot is that we are not the non-native police. Now, if removing non-natives has a wildfire prevention benefit, then absolutely that will be part of our goal. But if it's only a non-native removal benefit, then no, we're not going to do that. If it's only a carbon sequestration benefit, no, then we're not going to do it. But we are striving to get that the collateral effects from both activities. And then we have a monthly meeting with our environmental stakeholders. We don't show them all of our environmental documents, but we talk about what projects we're going to be bringing for approval. And we discuss what our BMPs or best management practices are going to be and what our mitigations are going to be for any environmental concerns with them up front 2 weeks before that package is going to the board. It's been very labor intensive. It's caused my staff and I a lot of time, and I see the question about our staff. Right now we have 2 paid staff, myself, my planning and program manager, and then we have 2 Grizzly Corps fellows that we applied for and got. And so technically, I guess we have 4 staff. But it costs us a lot of time. However, we feel it's an investment, a lawsuit avoidance investment or injunction avoidance investment. And I'm looking at the clock. I have a board meeting starting in 13 minutes. So I am going to hand it off to Rich to handle the rest of it. And thank you very much for including us.
Real quick, maybe you might want to chime in on this, Mark, before you.
Okay. All right.
I'm going to toss this question out now before you leave. Why not fire suppression as a part of this? You know, this is very heavy, if not 100%, well then risk reduction. Why not fire suppression? And how did you get the suppression philosophy to buy into this?
That was I was Jason's deputy chief when we went through this, and we made a conscious, and Marin County Fire has a staffing problem. And we made a conscious effort to separate those, and we went after the staffing monies separately. And we even made the decision that if we didn't get the staffing money, we were still going to go after the wildfire prevention only. It is only the MWPA can only be used for prevention. Our local union 1775 did not come in and be support. They didn't provide support, but they also didn't oppose. So they were neutral on the issue because they would have rather seen $20 million going towards firefighters and seats.
Right.
And I totally get that, but we had just come to the conclusion that it's time to be put in significant investment in fire prevention. And here I'm a 35-year operations guy. I mean, I never was on the prevention side, and quite frankly, I got tired of fighting the fires after they lit, and it was time for me to put my efforts before the fires lit. Wow. And we're finally getting. Let me tell. I'll be honest with you though. Not all of our line firefighters are totally supportive of the direction we're going and putting so much money into prevention, but they're coming along.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'd rather see risk reduction than fire front following.
Yes. All right. Thank you for including me. I got to go launch our other webinar.
Thank you, Mark, for your time. We do appreciate it.
Thank you. See you soon, Rich.
Yeah, and so a question probably perfect for you, Rich, is there's at least 2 bodies that govern this. Can you talk a little bit about the governing boards, if I can call them boards, that manage this? And how does Fire Safe Marin fit into the whole puzzle?
Yeah. So there really is actually one board at the end of it. Everything that has to approve everything. And that's 17 elected officials, 1 from each of the participating agencies. It's a complicated voting structure, but I think every vote that they've ever had has been unanimous. So it's working well. And so that's the group that has to approve the budget, has to approve the projects that are submitted and so forth. They meet monthly, public meetings and Brown Act and all of that. Once the day-to-day management is Mark and that, as you pointed out, the two of them, now they have two Grizzly Corps people to help them. And the next level is the operations group. As I say, it's a mixture of fire chiefs and a few of the town managers from the bigger towns that are on there. I'm kind of noticing more and more of the work is going towards the fire side of it because it's pretty technical, to tell the truth. And it's, is this project a good project? That not a good project? Is this benefiting all of us? And then the work of developing those projects goes to a technical advisory committee that is sort of the first pass at this. And there's representation beyond fire on that. Some of the environmental groups are involved in that, the big land management agencies down here and so forth, all go into that. And that's sort of the first pass on the projects, and then it goes up. That's pretty much how it works. And at any point, there are public meetings, the public can make comment. I saw a question in there about the Firewise sites, but we really encourage the Firewise sites. If you have a project that you think needs to be done that is larger than cleaning up somebody's backyard, because a lot of the talk is like really at that level, then you should be really working with your local fire department so they can put it into the priority of what needs to be done. And they can ascertain that, bring it forth to them. It'll be discussed at the technical advisory committee. You can attend those meetings and give your input to that. But everybody has something that they want to do. There's 75 of them down here. And a lot of what needs to be done is not necessarily, to be honest, strategic. So this has to be strategic for this to work, larger benefit of all. But that's kind of how they get input into it. That's what the structure is.
So for us in Sonoma County, we have Firewise communities and local fire safe councils, which I think are very comparable in terms of their composition and makeup. And with each of those types of groups, they have their own risk analysis, whether it be a CWPP or Firewise risk assessment. So when you alluded to pointing to projects, or supporting projects that are strategically placed, I'm guessing that you use the Firewise risk analysis that's been done to kind of help you decide on how strategically placed those are.
Yeah, so I'll be honest, I'm glad we have the Firewise program. I'm not super excited about it as like this fantastic, spectacular thing. And, when people do that, they come up with these brilliant local plans and all. It's, we have things that we think the Firewise communities should be doing. We call them the 7 universal Firewise activities that have very little to do with the Firewise program itself. It's kind of a paper shuffle a little bit. But it's a good organizing principle to get people together. What we really refer to in Marin is the county-wide prevention plan. So it needs to line up with that. And again, you can develop a great local plan for your little, when you have 75 of them, some are fairly small, that really doesn't really make any strategic sense whatsoever. So, and we don't have a lot of pushback. Oh no, that's a bad idea. People on our Firewise sites buy into that. And there's other ways that we support them for local things that do, like, curbside chipper programs and things like that. But when it comes to these larger projects that sort of raise to the level of the MWPA, it makes more sense that they work through their local fire departments on those. And then there are, as been pointed out, there is some local money. So if you're in the town of, I'll pick on Fairfax, my neighbor over here. If you're in the town of Fairfax and you're a Firewise community, you have something that you want done that's sort of very local, well, there is money coming. 20% of the money from MWPA, their contribution, goes back to Fairfax. So they're better working with the town of Fairfax and the local fire department, which in this case is Ross Valley Fire Department, on whether whether that's a good idea. Because a lot of people can kind of get together and say, this is so cool, we really want to do this. But you know, when somebody else looks at it, sometimes needs to be a broader perspective on it.
Yeah.
And then I didn't answer the other part of your question about how does Fire Safe Marin fit in this. So not surprisingly, we're a nonprofit 501c3. And so we're like anybody else. We submit a proposal each year to the MWPA. This last year, we put in 20 projects. This year, we have 19 projects that have to be vetted through these groups. So it goes through the operations committee and so forth. And then it goes up to the full board. We submit a monthly report of all the activities and how we're making progress on the plans. We put together an annual report. If anybody's really interested in it, go to our website and you'll see all the reports. You'll see how much work we're doing, but also how we have to be accountable and report on how the funds are being used and whether it's being done wisely and what kind of progress we're making and what kind of metrics we're seeing coming out of that and so forth. So that's sort of how we fit into the big picture.
Yeah. So I want to ask you a little bit about your assessments. You used the word home assessments, inspections, sort of interchangeably. And I'm curious, how do you pull that off? Or do you have paid inspectors or folks doing code enforcement? And are they actually doing code enforcement, or are they just going out providing education and outreach to property owners to help them, you know, make good decisions around in and around their home?
Good question. So 20% of the funding goes towards this program. It's being done differently in different jurisdictions, but it's sort of gradually coming together. And I think over the next couple of years, it may be just one way of doing it. So for example, in Novato took their share of funding for that and basically hired, they call them WIMS, Wildfire Mitigation Specialists. You know, it is a real thing. They love that. So they hired people that's what their job is, and they go out there and they do, and they really like the term home evaluations because they're not issuing citations. If something were really egregious, it would get referred to their fire prevention office and they would deal with that. But this is meant to be educational. So they go out there and they work with the homeowners. They go through the checklist, looking at home hardening, fire smart landscaping, trees limbed up, all the rest of that, leave them with a written report of what needs to be done. And then they do some follow-up that. That's sort of the Novato way of doing it. And they're using a form that is local to Novato for that. The sort of, I think, the more cutting edge thing that's going on, and I do love Novato, so I'm not putting that, I think they do a fantastic job. Maybe more where we're heading is what they're doing in Central Marin, and that's Corte Madera, Larkspur, actually all of West Marin, San Anselmo, Fairfax, all that area in there. They've started by hiring seasonal inspectors, so they do a lot more inspections in a short period of time. And they have an electronic reporting format that's new this year that I personally think is spectacular. I know Mark Brown likes it, and that's why I think it's eventually maybe adopted by everybody. But this form is collecting an incredible amount of data. It's not hard to use. It's very state of the art, so it's easy for the home evaluators to use it. It has links to Fire Safe Marin for further information on some of the more detailed how to do things, whatnot. It's going to tie into the grant program the way Mark's talking about. And then it's set up for homeowners to document their follow-up. And it also is set up for if an evaluator needs to go out there to do the follow-up and you see where everything is. So it's just, I just think it's a really great system. And again, all of that is funded by the home evaluation percentage that they're getting. And then it's a little bit different in Southern Marin. San Rafael is a combination of full-time inspectors all year round or evaluators and part-time seasonal folks. I know they're really excited about the form. They like that. And because passed some legislation. They're probably the most, they're probably a little more conscious than some of the others are about code violations and whatnot. But it's because they've been working on this for a long time over there. So I'm making this to point out that not everything is 100% standard here, which I think is good. There's some local determination about things, but that's how it's all being carried out.
Now, given that there's not a countywide standard for doing those assessments or inspections, has anybody set like a minimum qualification for that individual to do those? Are you guys using the NFPA's, wildland mitigation specialists as a like criteria, or is there just kind of on the job? How are those guys trained? That was one of the questions in the chat.
Different training in different places. So if you're getting hired for a full-time job, I think everybody has the wildfire mitigation specialist qualification in Nevada, for example, and they're full-time. When you're bringing on people to do seasonal inspections for 4 months, you don't have time for that. And they hired in Central Marin, I think they hired about 30 people, but they put them through a very intensive 2-week training program. And then they're monitored for quite a bit when they first go out in the field. And then there's some mixtures of all that. Nobody looks at things differently. Nobody's saying in Nevada, here's the standard that we're looking for homes to be compliant versus somewhere else. We're really all on the same page about that. We all believe in the same things. And again, I think part of this came about because we had to start this thing in a very short period of time last year. And the groups are talking more and more. And I think over time, we'll see more and more of it standardized. We were looking at creating a training program through College of Marin for people who are interested in this.
I was just going to bring that up. Thank you.
Yeah. So, and again, we ran into a thing of a time situation. They needed more time to work on the program. We had to hire some people right away. But gosh, there's so many things going on here. But we are looking for more standardized training going forward on this. But still, you're a local fire department, you have to make your own local hire. They don't work for MWPA. So they work for Nevada Fire, they work for Marin County Fire. So there needs to be some flexibility for the individual agencies based on their experience and the capacity is different. I mean, the capacity in Nevada is one thing versus the Ross Valley Fire Department. They're not all set up the same way to manage these programs.
Yeah, I like the concept of workforce development because, moving forward in this space, there's going to be a huge vacuum of need for folks to get out and do a lot of this work, to technical work or structural hardening and, the fuels reduction work in and around homes and farther out, forest management. All of that requires, trained up folks in a workforce that really, for Northern California, it's a new thing. Southern Cal, they've been doing it a while, but up here, there's a lot of, I think, opportunity to grow workforce here. Do you want to share a little bit more in detail with what, we were working on, or most of you guys were working on with the structural hardening training thing?
So that's kind of
what we called it.
This is sort of an offset. So 2 things are going on, the same thing up in Sonoma. One, which I think is a big deal, is the new requirements on disclosures at point of sale for homes. Now has a home hardening section in there. And so there's not a requirement right now that the work be done. And this is very new, so I'm trying to figure out exactly how it's working in practice. But I think would not be surprising that if somebody's buying a home and you're on a disclosure form, it's pointed out that something hasn't been done, then you're not likely to make the sale until something is done about that. So trying to figure out how much of that's really happening, we have to sort of see. And sort of related to that is finding people to do the work, because a lot of times this is sort of glorified handyman type of stuff. And there are hardly any contractors who want to take on that type of work. So Roberta participated with us. We had a lot of different people involved in it, the North Bay Conservation Corps and home hardening specialists and whatnot, to come up with basically what we viewed as a proposal to create a home hardening workforce of people that ideally recruited from underserved communities as an entry into the workforce, trained up to do some of this simpler work, do the work through a nonprofit, and meet what we think is going to be increased demand for this type of work to get done. I thought Conservation Corps was going to take it on. They decided they couldn't. And again, I don't want to take up a ton of your time, but there's been a lot of follow-up on that. By no means is the proposal dead. I think it's going to come up in a little bit different way down here, but I think all of us are going to be faced with this in the future, is that as these programs take place and you get your home evaluated and you realize that your vents are not properly screened and you're not a do-it-yourselfer, who are you going to call up to do that work? You know, the contractor's going to, well, I'm only going to be there 4 hours doing that. I'm not going to do that. So I think there's a demand for that and an exciting opportunity going forward with it.
I think we have about 10 minutes left on my calendar to kind of finish with the Q&A. So I have a couple more questions. And I'm going to just kind of leave it kind of open to you, but also point to something I heard recently. The broad question is, what are some things that you see that aren't working well that maybe we should be aware of moving forward? And one thing that was brought to my attention recently was that I heard a rumor that some of the way that the funds are collected through property values makes it such that the money that's raised needs to go back into those areas. So for example, if you have a very populated area, very urbanized area, that's generally where most of the value will come from, your revenue will come from. Does all that revenue go back into that footprint, that geopolitical area, that tax-based area, or are you allowed to just put it all out there, put it in front of the board, and the board says, these are projects we want to fund, kind of thing? What are the mechanics of that?
So that was probably the biggest behind the scenes fight in crafting the language for the JPA before the tax measure was even created. And it's understandable. And I'll pick on my friends in Novato here. So Novato is about 25% of the population Marin, and not surprisingly, they contribute about 25% of the tax funding that goes to the NWPA. So it really would be kind of tough on them. You say, yeah, and we'll use that money as we see fit. And it'd be great to remove eucalyptus trees out there in Bolinas and spend all our money on that, right? So we're not going to do that. It doesn't work like that. Marin is divided into 5 zones. The zones are not exactly equal in size. So one zone's Novato, one is San Rafael. They're roughly equal. Southern Marin, which is, let's say, so Novato and San Rafael are each about 25%. Southern Marin is in the 10% range, and this is their proportion of the contribution. Central Marin is 15-ish or something like that. And then West Marin is the 5th zone, is in the 8 to 10, something like that. Those are not exact, those are approximate numbers. And so the way this works is every 5 years, the information I'm going to talk about is collected continuously. And the basic rule is that 80% of the money that comes from a jurisdiction has to be ultimately spent in that jurisdiction. So if Nevada's contributing $100,000, at least 80,000 of the 100% of that 100,000 has to be spent there. But the way that's evaluated is at the end of 5 years. At the end of 5 years, we take a look at how things went, because it does vary from year to year. 1 year's more spent there, less another year. We don't want to get hung up on that, but we do pay attention. So we don't want to all of a sudden say, you're 25% of the contribution, we're doing nothing there this year. That's not going to work, and it doesn't work that way. So that's the funding formula. 80% of the money that comes in has to be spent in that jurisdiction. But once again, and this was hard to get everybody to understand this. And I used that example of Sleepy Hollow there. I mean, Novato could be spending a lot of its money working on ridge tops in the western part of the town that's benefiting everybody on the other side of that ridge top in a really big way. And I don't know, I don't know, people just, it was hard to get them to see it that way, but that is the reality of it.
Yeah.
And that's why the projects have to have kind of a strategic rationale to them.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that came up at this morning's meeting, you know, that makes me, that generates a response to that for me is, you know, the question asked is, well, do you want that smoke and ash dropping on you? You know, even though the fire's outside your area, we need to put funds there. If we don't, you're going to get smoke and ash dropping on you. Do you want that? Do you want to have to be sheltering in place because of the smoke, you know, and all that? Apologize for that. So one last thing I wanted you to kind of tell us a little bit about your Stellar Chipper program before we wrap up, because I know about your chipper program. It's fantastic. It's stellar. Can you kind of just give a Reader's Digest version of how that all works to share with us? Because I think that is amazing.
Yeah, so it's slightly evolving. So Fire Safe Marin had been supported chipping programs for several years, small scale, Firewise sites and whatnot. But this was the opportunity to do it on a bigger scale. So in the first year of this, we organized sort of a countywide program, and it was curbside chipping because it makes a big difference. And so the first year we did 2,700 curbside visits. I think we picked up like 15,000 cubic yards of material and whatnot. And honest to God, people just love the program. It was, we put out polls as part of the program. We have 60-70% response to the polls, which is kind of amazing. And it was like a 99+% satisfaction rate. And so many people said, I never would have removed this material if it weren't for the curbside chip up coming in. So you go in there, you cut it, you put it on the curb, we pick it up, and away it goes. It's even environmentally sensitive because if all that's taken away in individual pickup trucks, that's a lot of trips to the disposal site. So it's a very efficient program. The second year we expanded the program. We let the piles be even larger. We pretty much pick up almost anything. And we expanded to parts of Marin that we didn't have time to do the first year. So literally everybody in Marin gets 2 opportunities to sign up for this program. You go online, there's a schedule when they'll be coming to your neighborhood. So you've got to do it based around that. And so we're probably looking at closer to 4,000 pickups this year, and not as much of an increase in the increase in chip material is not as proportionate, because a lot of people the first year had never done any chipping and so put out big piles. And then we're in more areas where there's really less vegetation than in some of them were last year, to make sure everybody gets a shot at this. And then the real goal, we tried to do it this year and we kind of did, but next year we really want to make it, the evaluator comes out to evaluate your home. Here's what you need to do. The chipper's coming through here in a month. That's really where we want to go with this thing. But for taxpayers, and this is kind of important, they really feel like I got my money's worth, because for those who participate, the value of that pickup is usually more than what they're paying in the parcel tax. So that people really feel they're getting their money's worth. People really like the program. If you want to know all about it, you can go on our website. There's a whole kind of interesting report about how all of it was done and how it was set up and so forth.
Yeah, and a couple of people, you probably saw it in the chat, you know, what happens to the chip materials? Do they go to the biochar generator, or do they go to the landfill? What happens to those?
So most of the material, for convenience sake, ends up going through Marin Sanitary. So Marin Sanitary, most of the material then is taken out to Stockton and put in a gasification facility. So they make electricity. This year, a lot more of the material, because we have more work going on every day and it's even more spread out, So some of it is going to West Marin compost, if that's a convenient place. So that's 100% composted. Some of it is going to Redwood landfill, where it's pretty much all composted up there. But there's limits to how much you can compost, because Redwood landfill is kind of maxed out on what they can take. Same thing with West Marin compost. So even if you love composting, you can never compost 100% of the material. It's complicated process. You need a lot of land to do it. So gasification, I mean, people may have their opinions about it, but gasification to convert electricity is probably always going to be a major part of the whole thing. And we do have studies looking at biochar and all the rest of it. We're very aware of that, and we're studying that. So are the big disposal companies. But there has to be some economics to the scale of all of this.
Yeah. And then one last question that I want to honor that was in the chat is, what about non-chip material? If it's like Sonoma County, we just don't pick up, non-chippable material. That's on the property owner. But
There's very,
like,
yeah, we have some restrictions of what we'll take, but you're really not supposed to put poison oak out there as an example, but they do. We take it. About the only, and the stuff from palm trees is tough. And same thing with bamboo, because it wraps around. But what we do is we have them put it on the side, and then we throw it in the back of the truck on top of the chips, and then it's dealt with separately when it goes for disposal. So other than wood with nails in it and that type of thing, we pretty much take everything. And then even, I think the size of a branch is like 10 inches or something like that, pretty big.
yeah.
So there isn't much left. And then I see the thing about chipping on the ground. This is one difference between Sonoma and Marin. There's a lot more of the sort of small ranchette farm properties up there where that really makes good sense, and you can do that. There's a little bit of that in West Marin, but for most people, the amount of material they're putting out, you just can't chip and broadcast in place. You really got to take it away.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. Well, I lied earlier. I do have one last question. Would you be willing, and I know the answer to this already, but I want you to share it with everybody. Would you be interested, willing, et cetera, in helping Sonoma County in our tax measure moving forward? Help continue to share lessons learned, et cetera, and help us out in an advisory capacity.
I'll be glad to. We're all sort of like all of you. We're all really true believers in this mission and whatnot. So, and it just, nobody likes paying more taxes. We really get that, but we're not going to get to the next level unless we pass measures like this. And my own background, I'm retired from San Francisco Fire Department. So I'm very fire background. And staffing is an issue everywhere, but this really helps firefighters a lot, creating defensible space and home hardening and all that. It's a tremendous assist for them. So I do think it's, kind of money well spent that makes their job easier, more successful.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Rich. I know, as I recall, I think you do have a time constraint. Can you hang around a little longer, or do you have to bug out?
I'll hang a little bit longer. I'm supposed to be at that meeting where Mark is, but I'm not coming up till later. And if I'm not there, he can explain that I'm doing good with our neighbors. So
Okay. All the good work of Fire Safe Marin. I love it. So what I'd like to do next is attempt to do like 3 breakout rooms. And Rich, if you don't mind, maybe facilitating one of the breakout rooms, and Mason will facilitate one and I'll facilitate the other. And I'm used to having Kaylin do this. So I haven't done it before. But I am going to assign automatically 3 breakout rooms, and I might have to reassign you, Rich, and Mason to breakout rooms.
So give me just a little more guidance too on what we're looking for.
Oh yeah, well that's fair. So what we try to do with the Fire Alliance meetings is toward the end we break out into smaller groups where we can kind of more intimately have some dialogue. And, the facilitator is just there to kind of listen, maybe direct the discussion if they're a subject matter expert, and then report back in terms of the general consensus or sense from the group when we come back. It's like a 15 or 20 minute, group dynamic exchange. And then we kind of see, what people have to say, intimately in the groups. I initially was kind of poo-pooing it when Kaylin thought about doing it early, and it turned out to work pretty well. So we started doing it. So I will go ahead and try to do that at this point. And then, yeah, are you okay with that, Rich?
Great. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to do that now. I'm going to create 3 breakout rooms that'll assign automatically. And then, actually, I see some champions in each group. So group 1, I'm just going to ask Carleon or Chief Nichols to champion group 1. And I'm going to ask Tracy Kettleman or Priscilla Abercrombie to facilitate group 2 or room 2. And then, let's see, I'll just go ahead and, gosh, I'm not in any group. I'll ask you, Rich, to just facilitate group 3.
Okay.
Yeah. Where did it put me? It didn't put me anywhere. That's weird. Well, I'm just going to open the groups, and then Mason and I, it looks like, aren't assigned. So he and I will just jump into one group or the other. I'll probably jump into group 2. Mason, why don't you jump into group 1? I'll jump into group 2. And as long as the facilitators delegated or okay with that, we'll do that. If not, I'll facilitate the group I'm in, and Mason, you can facilitate your group. Okay, I'll see you in about 20 minutes. We're all back. So thanks, everybody. So let's report out. I think I was in group 2. Does somebody want to report out from group 1?
Yeah, I can go ahead and do it. I think
Okay.
I had a good idea of what everything that was explained there.
Okay.
We basically just talked about the Marin model and sort of how that applies to Sonoma County. It's definitely an apples to oranges comparison. Some of it works, some of it may not, and really the main problems that we have here in Sonoma County that apparently Marin was able to solve was just having more. We don't have enough boots on the ground and resources to be able to address a lot of the problems and projects that need to get done. There's a lot of plans that are in place, but really it's, we need people to run the chippers and feed the chainsaws and do all the work. And then again, another thing is, just the need for greater organization and cooperation. There's a lot of different fire groups and agencies, and just a lot of players in the arena and in the county. So, we just talked about maybe having a central wildfire authority to bring all that together and kind of make coordination a little smoother. Yeah.
I'll jump into group 2. I had, in my group, we had some good people. Priscilla was there, and Andrew Soul was there. Anyway, so what the takeaways from our group are, as we move forward with this tax measure, transparency is going to be key to keep people informed and keep people engaged and to feel like there's ownership in it moving forward. And another thing that came up was the need to make sure that structural hardening and defensible space was foremost on the minds of the tax measures authors in terms of allocating whatever funds are raised towards those endeavors. And also to help those most in need and those that need to form, local communities. So, look at those most in need and provide resources for those. The other key takeaway was the need / ability to leverage the grassroots groups that are out there now. You know, you've got Fire Safe Occidental, you've got Camp Meeker Fire Safe Council, Grove Street Fire Safe Council, you know, the COPE groups, lots of folks out there that have a lot of dogs in this fight that can help get whatever measure evolves out there in front of the taxpayers to get this thing moving forward. And using the model, you know, as Mason mentioned, using Marin's model, it's kind of like an example of a mostly success story. I think is a good thing to do. Yeah, and then we heard a little bit from Team Rubicon, and David is willing to do a future Sonoma County Fire Alliance presentation to talk about Team Rubicon and all the work Team Rubicon does. So that's it for Group 2. Did I miss anything, Priscilla or Andrew or David or anybody else who was in the group? Tracy?
You know, we talked about the importance of the 80% going back to the community that spent the taxes, but
Yeah.
you also talked about the importance of making sure that it gets into the communities that need it.
Yes.
And I wonder about West Marin and some other areas where there's not such a huge tax base, but there's a great need. And so I think that's maybe one of the differences between Marin and Sonoma County is that we really need to pay attention to that piece and how that equity will work here in Sonoma County.
Well, I think that would be one of the benefits of a sales tax measure, because it, like fire, sales tax measure really crosses all the county boundaries, you know, without regard. So then you're not encumbered with having to allocate funds, you know, oh, this community put in more, so they should get more resources, kind of a thing. I do see that as a benefit. The thing that I worry about with the sales tax measure, honestly, is the population of Santa Rosa is huge. And there, I don't have a lot of confidence that that population is going to vote in favor of taxing themselves even more than they already pay. But anyway, that's just my thoughts. Okay, Team 3. Let's see.
Roberta, Ben is raising his hand.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Before moving on.
Yes, please. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, and so to Priscilla's point, that was something that we addressed in our group as well, but also to go with that, the 17-person board that makes up the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority, 17 people at a table gets very convoluted very quick. And so the conversation we had was, while you're obviously going to put together a group to make sure that we're strategic and addressing the most critical projects, making sure that the agencies having jurisdiction or standing in that conversation are at that table, so that we're not missing opportunities to do what the different agencies, case in point being the home hardening, obviously Permit Sonoma has to have somebody at that table. So that's important for whatever proceeds forward from here. And then obviously with our standing that, you know, roughly 80% of the county is within the state responsibility area. And so making sure that the different players that have statutory responsibility for fire protection here in the county are part of that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Chief. Excellent point. And then Group 3. Marshall, do you want to report out from Group 3?
Yeah, I was actually the most quietest during the group. So
Oh, so good. So you could report out because you know you listened.
yeah, I mean, I would say the conversation was a little bit different in our group. We had a representative, you know, from Napa County, and Napa County may be looking at doing some type of revenue generation to do stuff similar. And then there was talk about kind of just a little more discussion on the Marin County model and kind of the political climate in Sonoma County with the current Board of Supervisors and what's going on. But everyone else in that group, please speak up, because as you guys know, I didn't talk at all. So that was my listening skills.
Elena or Harry or Jim Thompson or Susan, anything to add from Group 3?
This is Harry. I'll add a little bit. I've been working on this for some time through the Santa Rosa Chambers Advocacy Council as well as the Sonoma County Alliance. And the conclusions we've come to in both of those organizations supporting the fact that going forward, we need to really start focusing on things other than fire suppression. Fire suppression has received a huge amount of effort to date, and we've done a lot in that regard, and we've beefed up our resources. But what's lagging is the other parts of it, the fire prevention and the defensible space. And looking at that, it really looks like maybe Marin County's model isn't the only one, but it's certainly one that seems to work. And you could do worse maybe than copying what they did or trying to come close to it. They have the combination of the institutional structures through the Joint Powers Authority, a long-term financing through their combination of taxes, and an organizational structure and the human structure to basically carry out programs related to the fire prevention side of things that we don't have here in Sonoma County and is sadly lacking. We put money in the short term from the PG&E settlement monies, and we've applied them on a one-shot basis, but we do not have a long-term program. And that's something we really need to do. We really need to focus on vegetation management, defensible space, and we need to take a different direction to doing that. And to date, the board, while it's considering a new ballot measure for next year, doesn't really seem to be pointing in that direction. And we think part of our job is to try to get them to think harder about really refocusing the efforts going forward, not taking anything away from fire suppression, but instead goosing up our efforts in the direction of fire prevention.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Or an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I think Ben Franklin said that. So we've just got a couple minutes left, you guys. So with that, thank you guys for participating. And yeah, I really appreciated Mark Brown and Rich Shortall's presentations. Really worthwhile.
So let me just
Yes.
thank everybody. A really great opportunity. And if you ever need me to come back or you have follow-up questions, you can reach me or go through Roberta or whatever. And more power to Sonoma. You're our close neighbors and we think very well of you. We want us all to be fire safe. So
Absolutely. Thank you, Rich, for your help with this. Definitely. Thank you. Thank you.
all
Thank you.
right, take care.
Take care. So keep your guys' eyes open for this thing as it grows and moves forward and evolves, the tax measure I'm talking about. Yeah, stay tuned.